Good afternoon, everybody. We finally got Tracy Margiano and the Database Administration Virtual Group together. I'm delighted to welcome her, and she has an exciting presentation planned for us on collecting performance metrics.
Yes.
I do want to thank our sponsors, Quest and SUSE. They are the ones who make it possible for us to have raffle winners at every presentation, and we are very grateful to them. Summit is coming up. I swore that I wasn't going this year, but I have an airline ticket and a hotel reservation, so I guess I am going. It's always exciting and all sorts of things to learn. And I urge you to go if you possibly can. And to encourage you, we have some discount opportunities. The first one gives you streaming access to the past 2017 content in order to sort of get your appetite ready for the summit. The second one gives you a $150 discount code, and you can use our code VGDISKG0E and save $150. For every 20 uses of our code, we'll receive a complimentary registration to the summit, and we will raffle that off. Passion Award, it's an award to volunteers. It's a really wonderful award. And for many years, it seemed to always be women who were winning it. The last couple of years, there's been a man, but the women had dominated the field for a long time. If there's somebody you know who is doing making a difference in the past community, feel free to nominate them. The URL is on the screen. We are one of many virtual groups, some of which are organized by language and some of which are organized by technology interest. Women in technology is a particular favorite of mine, having been a woman in technology for more years than I care to mention. It's good to see support for the people who are coming along, and also to get support yourself. SQL Saturday, if you've never been to one, try to find one near you. They're a full day presentation of papers, summit quality papers. They're free. You can see they're happening all over the world. Tracy said she's going to present at some in Denmark or in Europe. I'm told that my screens aren't showing, and they asked me to restate the code, which I will do in a minute. Okay, I guess I can see my screen. If you're not a member of PASS, I urge you to join. There's online content like this one, this presentation, as well as many others. And there's no cost to join. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on. And I promise to restate the discount code. The $150 discount code is V like in Victor, G like in group, D like in David, I as in Irving, S like in Sam, K like in Kiss, G like in Guy, 0, E like in Edward. And our presenter today is Tracy Borgiano. She's a database administrator. I think your company has a new name, but we won't worry about that. She's spent over 20 years in IT and is a Microsoft certified system engineer. She's worked with SQL Server since 6.5, and she's also bringing Linux content into the various virtual past groups. And she badgered me until I had this person, and then I had that person, and then I had the other person. And you have all gotten your opportunity to see those presentations thanks to Tracy's badgering. She started tinkering with databases when she was in middle school to keep her sports card collection organized. And outside SQL Server, she volunteers with foster children as their advocate in court. It's interesting that people who are volunteers in the geek community tend to also be volunteers outside the geek community. And now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Tracy and let her do her thing. And I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, can you see my whole screen or the presenter screen? Did it share the right screen?
It's still showing the is this?
There we go.
Great.
There we go. Wasn't giving me an option at first. So we're going to talk about collecting performance metrics. As Sharon mentioned, I'm Tracy Borgiano. I'm known as the database superhero out in the real world. I work for Broadvine now instead of Channel Advisor. She did most of my introduction, so I will skip most of the screen. This year I am an IDERA Ace and was named an IDERA Superstar, so IDERA has been sponsoring me going to a lot of my SQL Saturdays and other events. I do co-lead an advanced DBA group out of the Raleigh area where we try to get some level 400, 500 topics like, people melting our brains to do things. And I did badger Sharon into doing some Linux content and a bunch of other virtual groups as well. I also founded a website called WeSpeakLinux.com to get some more generic Windows to Linux type content out there, so it wasn't just SQL specific. Also a member of SpeakingMentors.com to get more people into speaking like I'm doing so that we can have more speakers in the community. And there's a number of other people that are out there that are available to help anybody that's interested in becoming a speaker. And as she mentioned, I do volunteer for abused and neglected children through the foster care system. It's known as CASA nationwide in the U.S. And North Carolina Guardian Ad Litem program in North Carolina. So if anybody's interested in that, I do have a blog post that is my pinned post on Twitter where you can read about it and shoot me any questions. So we'll keep that brief. Sharon did most of that for me. So now on to why we're actually here. So as far as an agenda goes, we're going to cover why we would want to collect performance metrics. When do we want to collect performance metrics? What performance metrics we want to collect? and how we're going to go about collecting those. And we're going to use a couple of different methods of doing that. So first, we'll start with why. Why having performance metrics are important. One is for understanding your trends in your environment. You need to know, for example, when is a good time to run CheckDB or run index maintenance jobs or run any other big processes on your system based on what runs in your environment. Those are things that I've had to do recently at my new job, is try to figure out when customers are not using the system so that I can set these things up, because before I worked there, they did not run these things. So I had to set up a monitoring system and go, hey, the system's not being used from 12 to 4. I can run these type things during that time period and be able to have a normally functioning database environment and not worry about corruption and fragmentation on my indexes. But you can also use it to know that, hey, noon's a really busy time. Maybe we need to not run certain things during this time period. If there's jobs that are running on the system that might need to be able to be moved to a different time period, you can move things around based on that. It's also good for helping you find a problem before someone complains. If you have a system set up and you can set up alerts or be able to just proactively look at it and see that, hey, something's different than what it normally is, then you're able to go in and get to it before your vice president's over at your desk saying, hey, what's going on with the system? Or a customer's calling in and complaining that something is happening on the system and you need to be able to troubleshoot it. So those are great advantages to being able to collect those performance metrics ahead of time. You can also proactively tune your system. If you know ahead of time that you're starting to ramp up on CPU or your page life expectancy is starting to be lower than normal, you can know, hey, I might need to add some more CPU, or I might need to add some more memory, or I might need to do some more indexing, or I might need to look at my plan cache and figure out what queries are taking up the most CPU and try to tune those stored procedures and things like that so that my system is being better utilized. It also makes troubleshooting easier because you can see what things are running on your system and know what you need to troubleshoot. So if you're capturing things like SP who is active or using QueryStore or any of those type tools to see what's going on your system, or harvesting the plan cache, you can go in there and visualize what's happening and see what you need to troubleshoot. It also helps for capacity planning. At my last job, we had a system that was sitting there and they wanted to add a database to it, and they came to us and said, hey, you think we can handle having this 1 gigabyte database added to the server? And I went and looked at it, and the PLE averaged out over a 2-week period on my chart was at 3 days consistently. I was like, sure, we can handle a 1 gig database there. And we had like 64 gigs of memory. It was like never going to dip below a PLE that was not acceptable. So being able to see that you have the capacity to add things because your PLE or your CPU is staying low tells you that you're able to add things. And in that case, we probably could have took away some resources from that particular server. Some other things is everybody talks about having baselines to show you what your normal performance is. And these are good for, you need to know what your normal CPU utilization is on your systems. That way when you're rolling out new code changes, you know if something has changed and you need to troubleshoot something that's happened because of your changes. You also need to know how much memory is using for your buffer pool versus your plan cache. That way you also know if you're reading in more pages into your buffer pool than normal or flushing them out faster than normal. What is your page life expectancy? Are you all of a sudden dipping down to 0 and getting the system slower because of these things are happening because of some code that's changed out? Or is this just something that normally happens this time of day because of something that normally that runs? Without collecting these metrics, you would not know these things. And it shows you your abnormalities that you need to know to investigate. So your sudden CPU spikes that happen. I have a system right now that every hour it spikes up to 70% and spikes back down. Because I can see that spike, I can go in and I can find out exactly what's happening because I know exactly what it is. But if you see a sudden increase up to 10% and it persists and it stays there, that tells you that something's probably changed on your system that you need to go in and investigate. Did your buffer pool or your plan cache all of a sudden get higher or lower than it normally should be? Also tells you there's something that you need to go in and investigate, especially if it stays there and consistently stays there. That tells you something's changed. And the same with your PLE. If you all of a sudden drop your PLE to a lower than normal average and you stay down there, that tells you something's reading and churning through your buffer pool and not keeping your pages in memory longer than it should, as long as it should, so you need to be able to troubleshoot these things. And if you're collecting all the metrics that you need to collect, you'll be able to better go in and troubleshoot these things and know these things are happening on your system before somebody comes over and complains and you don't know what your baseline is and you don't know what to troubleshoot because you didn't have these metrics ahead of time to know what your normal is. So on to when we should collect performance metrics. I say collect them all the time. I've got a solution that we'll go over at the end that goes through and collects most of your performance metrics for you, and it's very lightweight. I collect samples on a regular interval of every 30 seconds using this metrics. Some of the things that we do not cover metrics-wise is just collecting like table space. We will collect how much space your database takes up, but we won't go as detailed as table space. But we need to collect our metrics all the time because otherwise you don't have a baseline of what's happening at a specific time period. And if somebody comes to you and wants to troubleshoot something that happened yesterday, if you weren't collecting it yesterday, you can't tell them what happened yesterday. If you weren't collecting it at 2 in the morning, you can't tell them what happened at 2 in the morning. So you really need to be collecting them all the time. Now, on what systems should you collect your metrics on? Production, of course, is your most important system. But your test environment is production to your developers. So, in my opinion, you should be collecting your metrics on all of them. Now, I say this because production, you're going to be troubleshooting the most because it's most important to your customers and whatever your business is using. But your developers are going to be trying to fix things that are going to be going into production. So you're going to need to be able to tell them, hey, this change that they rolled out for index or this store procedure they rolled out had this effect on the system. So, in my opinion, you should be collecting your metrics on all of them. Now on to how. This is the meat and potatoes of the presentation, so to speak. The first thing I like to start off with is being able to capture what is actually running on the system. Adam Mechanic wrote a great store procedure called SP Who is Active. Hopefully everybody has heard of this store procedure by now. It's been out for a while. So this captures what is occurring on the server right at this minute, what is running on this. So what I do is I set this up to capture into a table for later troubleshooting, and I run it every minute and gets what's running. So it captures most everything that's running that takes a long period of time to run. He has a blog article about how to capture this into a table. It's very simple to do. These happen to be the particular parameters I use to get the full inner text of what's running at the moment, get the task info, and actually get the execution plan saved into a table. And then I set up a job that actually cleans it out after a week or two, depending on what environment I'm in. My current company, I keep things for 30 days because we have month-end processes that run, and those month-end processes are very important to our customers. And I needed data for that. My last company, we only kept it for a week. Of course, you set up the job to clean it up. Also, Kendra Little did a podcast on setting this up so that you can fire it on alert based on when conditions happen on the server that you can look up as well. So if you're looking at the CPU being at 90% and you only want to capture it at that particular moment in time, you can do something like that as well using WMI and SQL agent alerts. But I like to just capture it every minute and then be able to go in there and query it and be able to go and look at that data. For if you're running on newer versions of SQL Server, if you got 2016 or 2017, you can use QueryStore and turn that on. I'm a big advocate of QueryStore. It did a lot of performance increases for us on 2017 by having auto plan correction turned on. But this can be used to fix the queries that have recently regressed in performance on your system. So you can go in and identify ones that had multiple plans and pick a plan that was better and say, hey, use this plan all the time, and it'll always use a plan and get rid of parameter sniffing problems. You can also use it to identify your top queries that are consuming the most resources. Even though they only have one plan, you can go and say, hey, this is the one that's using all my CPU or taking the longest or doing all my reads or all my writes. I need to tune this one because this is the one that's causing me the most problems. It also gives you an audit history of all your different query plans for a given query. I've seen as many as 20 plus query plans for a given query. It tells you there's a lot of different parameters that can be sent in, and the query optimizer can come up with different plans. So it tells you there's a lot of different ways SQL Server can do the same thing for one store procedure. So it gives you a good way of trying to figure out what SQL Server is doing. It also, because it stores the whole history of everything, you can analyze the resource usage pattern for a particular database because it has reports that show you the reads, writes, and CPU and durations of all the queries that have ran, and you can drill down into those things and see what's happening on that particular server. In 2017, they also added the ability to see weight stats by category for each query. So it's in 23 different categories like CPU and buffer and disk and so forth, so that you can see what's happening per query. And I mentioned before they had auto plan correction, so that if it sees that the plan's going to be better, it can automatically switch to a better plan and automatically unswitch from that plan. So those are things that are nice to turn on. We actually seen a 20% bump in CPU on a number of our systems at my last company by turning this on. For those who aren't on a newer version of the QueryStore, to collect some of this data, you can use OpenQueryStore. This is written by a few people over in Europe. So this is for if you can't upgrade yet. I would recommend going ahead and upgrading though if possible, because QueryStore is a good reason to push management into trying to get you to upgrade. But it comes with some reports that are integrated in the Studio Manager, and they're actually looking at coming up with a new release of this soon. But it provides some backwards compatibility back to 2008, and it captures the same type of data that QueryStore captures, but it doesn't give you any of the abilities to force plans or to autocorrect anything or weight stats or any of that stuff. It just kind of captures what's running based on the plan cache, and it gives you a little bit more of that history, so you can try to go in and on your own use that data to figure out what was running. And it's completely open source and free. So all of that stuff before just gives you a way to see what was running on your system. What I'm going to give you going forward actually gives you performance metrics, like stuff you would get from Perfmon. This is another open source solution that's completely free except for the hardware that you run it on. Nothing that I'm talking about here costs any money except for whatever hardware you run it on or whatever cloud provider you stick it in. And I'll go over the cost that we had at my last company for running it in the cloud as the very last slide. So there's this open source solution called Telegraph that one of my coworkers worked on to improve some of the SQL components of it as far as collecting data. So there's 3 components to this solution. One is InfluxDB, and this is an open source database solution. It's a time series database that by its name implies that it stores things by a timestamp or a time series. So it's designed to store things based on the time and store it efficiently. So when you get a timestamp of a data for performance, you get it happen at this time, and it's this metric on this server, and here's the number. And it's designed to store it by that time and store it efficiently and query it efficiently. So it's great for storing monitoring data and storing it in a very small amount of space and querying it back fast. So it's good for tracking events that are by time. It can be monitored. You can downsample it so that it can be summed up by 5 minutes instead of having it in the 30-second intervals, and you can aggregate it over time as well. Then we have a graphical piece that we need, of course. So if we've got a place to store the data, we've got to have a way to visualize the data. So GraphHonor provides us a graphical interface for our data that we're collecting. This is a very interactive interface. You can go in here and make your own charts. I'm going to provide you a link to a GitHub repository that has charts for SQL Server already built for you that you can design, and I've got a blog post that walks you through setting up this whole solution. But it's very interactive, and we're going to go through it. It also provides you the ability to create alerts. So if you got the CPU sitting at 80% or 90% and you want an alert, it can actually integrate into like Slack and email and text and things like that, and automatically send you alerts and attach the charts for your servers for you. It provides the ability to add links to a particular chart. So when you look at a particular chart, you can sit there and drill down into that chart and see things in more detail. So for example, when we get to weight stats, we've got those provided by what they do in 2017 for QueryStore. We've got those by categories, and then you drill down into them, and then we've got them detailed out by each individual weight stat, and we'll see that in a minute. And this is an example of what one looks like, and this happens to be the improvement that we got by turning on autoplan correction in QueryStore. We got a 20% improvement you can see in the middle by turning on autoplan correction by using QueryStore on one of our servers at my last company. And we've seen that on a number of our servers just by turning that on. So the final piece is Telegraph, which is open source as well. And it has many outputs, which is where it would put the data. We found Influx to be the most cost-effective way and the fastest way to put data. We at one point were using Elasticsearch for a different solution, but we had switched to this. It has many inputs as well, which is data that you can put into it. So we're not going to look at all of these, but there are many different things that you can use to get data into it. So a number of them are different database platforms. You got Cassandra, Docker, InfluxDB itself you can track, and we'll see that. You can track a Linux machine and just get data off of that. And that's one thing I like about this is it's cross-platform. So if you're running SQL on Linux, I know a lot of people aren't yet, but I do have a SQL and Linux machine running on here, and you'll be able to use the same exact chart to see the exact same data for a SQL and Linux machine as you do a Windows and Linux machine. But you can also just monitor a Linux box by itself versus just a Windows machine by itself. You don't necessarily have to be doing SQL. You can monitor MySQL, PostgreSQL, Redis, SQL Server, of course, or we wouldn't be doing this presentation. And you can monitor a Windows box, which we're going to see me monitoring my domain controller for an example on mine machine. So as far as what data is collected, we're collecting mostly data that's from DMVs or Perfmon collectors. So it can do some Azure components. I know that Microsoft is working on some Azure managed instance dashboards as we speak, and there are some QueryStore dashboards coming as well that aren't available yet. And they did some stuff around containers as well that they've linked to my dashboards for. But as far as Azure goes, it just queries the database resource stats for Azure. We're also getting the I/O virtual file stats, so you can see the latency on the databases themselves and what files are slow. You're getting all the memory clerks, so you can watch your buffer pool and your plan cache and everything else. You're getting some of the performance counters in the performance counters DMV. You're getting all the server properties that you might need as far as like what service pack level it is, how many databases are on there. Can't think of any more off the top of my head. We're getting our weight stats. As far as the installation goes, the next few slides are going to seem a little bit redundant because we're installing stuff on Linux. As Sharon mentioned, I badgered her into some Linux stuff. So this does run on Windows as well. So if anybody has any questions about running it on Windows, I can point you to some blog posts on running it on Windows. But my blog goes through exactly how to set it up on Linux because, well, you don't have to pay for the operating system. So for Influx, we just go to their website and we run the commands for the operating system. With Linux, we always have a few extra steps because they don't have all the permissions and stuff. But the few extra steps are just to start the service and set the service to auto start, and we add the ports that are special for influx to the firewall because everything's firewall. Then we create a database in influx for it to store our data. And we're going to set a retention policy so we don't keep our data forever and it automatically cleans up our data. And that's all outlined in my blog post, which I will bring up towards the end. And we do the same thing basically for GraphHonor. We just use their website to do everything. We run our few extra steps. We will go into GraphHonor and add InfluxDB as a data source. And we will import dashboards, and I will show you how to do those. Once we got those set up, for your SQL server, all you got to do is add a user. I handily gave it a my strong password called Telegraph. You give it view server state and view any definition, and it's able to get the data that it needs from your SQL server. As far as setting up Telegraph, you go download Telegraph from the Influx Data website, their newest build. What I do is I unzip it onto a network share, and I have a PowerShell that I use to install it on all my Windows machines. And you set up the config file to point it to whatever your Influx database is, because you have to configure it to say, hey, here's my InfluxDB. Here's where I need to go get to put the data. And then you just set up that config file, and then you run the PowerShell to run it, and it's done. So let's take a look at what a config file actually looks like, so that kind of makes some sense. So this is a config file for SQL Server. And as we talked about, we have our outputs, and this is just going to Influx, and this is just my internal IP address to my InfluxDB database. So wherever you're sending your InfluxDB, it could be the name to the server. It's always a URL. This is a default port it uses. You can change that as well. I just gave it a database name of Telegraph when I created it. And other than that, you don't have to change anything in your outputs. It's good to go from there. I will be providing you on download from my website these config files for you, so you don't have to do anything else. I gave it a hard password on my local machine of Telegraph 123, but you'll be putting in your own username and IDs that you use for your local machines. We'll be doing Query version 2 because that's the version of Telegraph that we're using. And then we've got a couple of extra inputs down here to get some performance counters from Windows, because we want some logical discounters and the processor discounters. And just to show you the blog post, we'll bring that up as well. Those are hidden just in case those didn't come up. Well, my blog, the top blog post under my popular post is exactly how to go through and set this up. So it just goes through the solution and tells you exactly how to go through and set this up on a CentOS operating system. So there's no gotchas there as far as setting everything up, and even got the config file for you and tells you how to set everything up. And here goes the PowerShell, which is what we're getting to now. So as far as installing it on the Windows server, I've got this PowerShell script here where you can send in multiple SQL server, and based off your network share that you saved it to right here, it would copy your Telegraph exe to it and your config file to your program files in Telegraph, and then install it as a service on your machine and start it for you, and then it's just running on your machine. It's like a 30 megabyte file that it puts on your machine, and then the 1 or 2 kilobyte config file, and it runs as a service on your machine and collects the data, and it will start sending it over once you configure that config file for you. So use it on one server, see if you start getting some data. Once you like it, do it on some other servers. Now, installing it on Linux is a little bit different because you don't have the ability to copy off of a Windows share. So we will do some of the similar steps we've seen before, where we go to their website and copy it off the operating system, use the Windows to do a few extra steps by creating our config file, editing our config file, starting the service, and setting it to auto start. Now, as far as setting up stuff in GraphHonor, we will just jump into GraphHonor to do that, because it's more fun that way. So this is GraphHonor, and I've already got 3 data sources here. So if you want to set up a new data source, you would hit plus, and our data sources are going to be InfluxDB, and we would give it a name of whatever our data source was, and whatever happened to be our URL to our data source, and then you would tell it what database you were using and what username and password you gave your data source you wanted it to be. So these are all outlined on my blog post on how to set them up. That's the fast, easy way to do that. As far as dashboards go, the dashboards I give you are all in JSON. So you can hit import and just copy and paste the JSON right here and hit load, and they'll automatically load all the dashboards for you and be ready to go. If you named data sources exactly the same as mine that are on the website, then they'll automatically start working. And those are the fast, easy ways into the data sources and the dashboards. So basically, like I said, you go through and you give it a name. I make it the default, the first one. I give it the URL. I fill out the details for Influx. You save and test it. And for the dashboards, you just click on import, copy and paste the JSON. You can rename it if you choose to. If it has a link to another dashboard in there, or if it's a link for a dashboard, it will break that. So you got to be careful of that. Then you click load, and then all the dashboards are available for download via GitHub. So we already looked at those, and so let's go check out what some of this stuff actually looks like in GraphHonor. So that's the fun part. The main dashboard in GraphHonor is the Instance Overview dashboard, and it provides you with the ability to look at one server and tell you what's going on with the server. So it tells me I've got 15 databases online, and it tells you the properties of the rest of them, and I've been up for about 9 hours. So that's, since I got up this morning, about how many cores I got, the memory, and what version of SQL Server I'm running. I started up my QueryStore workload right before this presentation just so we could see some workload running on the machine, and it tells us our CPU workload. It's telling us a whole bunch of stuff about our activity going on here, our user connections, our transactions per second, our lock timeouts, our wait stats. Parallelism is our biggest wait stat here. We'll come back to this chart in a minute. Telling us more about our buffer memory. We've only got 4 gigs, so we've only got 300 megs in our buffer pool, not very much. Our performance on our memory is actually pretty good. Our PLE is staying at 6 hours, so that's pretty cool. We've got details on what our tempDB is doing, so we're using some tempDB. So if you got read commit a snapshot on, you would see your version store down here, so that's kind of useful. You see how many temp tables it's using. So since I turned this on, it's using less temp tables, not many, because it was only using 20 before. Tells us our latency on our disk. It would tell us our size of our database if we went back a little bit further in time, how much free space we had, and if we had any availability groups, we would have data here. This tells us our log data that we're doing, log flushes. And then we've got some resource governor stats down here, but we don't have any groups, so we just got the default internal stuff going on down here. Now, if we go back up to wait stats, one of the things I had mentioned before was that you have the ability to do drill downs. Now, these are based on the 23 categories in QueryStore. If we were to drill down in here, we get the individual wait stats per type, and parallelism was our #1 thing, so let's add that one. And we can see CX packet waste is our top one. So you can actually drill down into each one of these and see as many different one of these as you want on the screen. So that gives you a nice quick way of checking on things. There's a couple of these charts that have drill downs on them, and you just denote them by the little triangle in the corner. Now, I mentioned I had a Linux box. I didn't really give it a very good name, but this is my Linux box, the server1example.com, and you'll notice the CPU here is really the only difference in this whole entire chart. As far as Linux go, everything else is the exact same, except for how it names the disk. But as far as everything else goes, this is the exact same. And what you'll like about GraphHonor is you're actually able to go in and change the queries. These are all just queries that are running. So the reason this is different is it's got the query here to say, hey, if this is this, run this query and show it to me. And if it's this, show this to me. And you can add queries here and select a particular measurement if you wanted to show something different, and select a particular tag or type of any type that you wanted to. So any of these charts can be customized to whatever you want to be on there, and you can go into each one of those, and that's where you can add alerts to, is under edits. You can go under alerts and change things. You can go under legend, and you can decide you want to see the minimum or the current values as well as just the max and the average. All depends on what you want to see. I mentioned before we had a chart in here for InfluxDB, so this is keeping track of the instance that's keeping track of all our databases itself. So this tells us what data is actually being stored in Influx and how well this system's actually performing. So we can see what data is being stored there, and it's only storing like 1.42 megabytes of data per minute in here. And you can keep up with any errors and latency there, so you can actually watch your system running there and make sure things are running efficiently there as well. We've got a transactions per second chart as well for our system. So we can see when I started up my QueryStore session, and we can actually click and see when things are happening. On any of these charts, if you want to see what's happening on a particular database, you can just click on that database or any item actually, and it'll just show you that particular item. You can control click and do 2 items. You can shift and do multiple items, and so forth, and then just click and get all the items back. So it makes it that's one of the things that makes it nice and interactive. We've got a low disk space chart right here that helps you keep up with all your systems to see which ones are running low on space. And we're only keeping track of one system right now. We also have this one keeping up with my domain controller and telling me what the CPU and memory and network latency are on it. And one other thing I wanted to show on this chart is when you are troubleshooting something, say you got a call that says something happened. Let's go back to 3 hours. And up here you can change your time frame to anything you want, and over here you can drill down into a specific time period that you want if you wanted to go to something besides what's specified here. But if for some reason you wanted to look at this particular time frame, you can click and drag, and it'll adjust all the charts on the screen to that particular time frame, and then you're able to go and look and see what's happening on that time frame. And when you hover over things, like over your wait stats, you can see exactly what the measurement was over that particular time frame and decide what you need to do about that particular time frame. So those are all nice and beneficial ways to be able to troubleshoot things. Now, I was going to briefly show you what goes on in QueryStore as well. After we kill all the connections that keep it running slow. I assume there's no questions so far?
There's just one. I'll save it to the end. We'll get more.
Okay. This is what the resource governor chart looks like if you actually have some actual groups in there. We had these set in there by application at my last company. So this was what it looked like by CPU by application. And this is what request by second looks like by application. So you can see that you can actually get some useful data out of this. There is a link to a podcast at the end of this where one of my coworkers talks about how we had to actually set this up. And this is the block task by group for that. So just to give you a brief look at what that would look like. So when it comes to QueryStore, you want to look at your overall resource consumption report first, because it's going to tell you what's been happening on your system. And you want to see, you would drill down into something from there, which I didn't mean to drill down that fast. Quick clicks. But from here, you can drill down and see what's happening on a particular day. Normally on your system, it would be full. Mine hasn't been running for a good month here. But you would drill down into a particular day and see what's happening. So I've drilled down into the day, and that takes us to our top consuming queries. And then you can see right here what the top consuming query is. It's got a lot of gnarly steam aggregates and compute scalars and stuff that it's doing. So any of these squares are times that it stopped executing. That's probably when I just killed it right there. And you can go in and try to see things. It's just like any other time you see a plan. If there's a green hint for a missing index, you will see it here. So there's things like that that'll be there. You'll see multiple plans. If there are plans, you can force the plans and things like that. You can actually go into a grid view and see the names of the stored procedures and go from there if you need to do something and find things that way. If you need to see what queries have been forced, you can go in here and view them. I don't have any because I don't have those turned on. If you need to see some that have regressed, you can go in here and see those as well. And those would show up. Mine's a pretty consistent workload just because it's pretty consistent data that's being sent through. So that's a brief overview of QueryStore. So the last part of my presentation is my last job, I was on call a lot. And I owned the on-call selfie hashtag in Twitter to the point where people were buying me beer every time I went to a SQL Saturday about. So we're going to figure out what interrupted my nap on a Saturday, and we'll see one of my on-call selfies. So I got this nice page that I had no idea what it meant because like the guy who set up this page didn't tell anybody what this page meant. So it said the socket timeout after 10 seconds happened on this server, and it says critical, and it's like, holy crap, what is this? What do we do? So I went and I connected to the server, and I was like, there's nothing wrong with the server. You know, I was able to do a SP who is active and stuff, you know, normal stuff looked like it was running. So I just went back to bed. You know, it was noon. So when I woke up a couple hours later, I went into GraphHonor, and I noticed that my buffer pool had dropped by 44 gigs, and it dropped my PLE down from 19 hours to 0 milliseconds. So then I went into my SP who is active output history, and I noticed that we were running checkDB, and it killed all my physical reads, and that's what it killed my buffer pool and dropped it down to 0 milliseconds. So I made the guy who made that dumb alert change it to 30 seconds instead of 10. And then, Of course, before I went back to bed, I put my on-call selfie hashtag out there. I get migraines, so I do sleep with headphones and sunglasses on a Saturday. That was my on-call selfie for that day. Now I'm not on call anymore, and I don't have to take those. But the final slide is we had about 500 servers at my last company, and we were paying for InfluxDB in AWS. We were running on a T4 micro, 8 CPUs, 32 gigs of memory, 60 gigabytes of disk space for $3,000 a year. We were running Grafana on a system on a T2 micro in AWS for about $5 a month. 1 CPU, 1 gig of memory, and that's what we were paying to monitor all 500 servers in our environment. And that was just for the Grafana setup and InfluxDB. So this is a pretty cost-effective solution for being able to get your Perfmon data and your data for your DMVs into a graphical interface that's nice to hand to management and nice to give them print screens of stuff and say, hey, this is what's happening, and graphically show them, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what happened when so-and-so did what. This is what happens when I added indexes. This is what happens when we do this. This is what happened when the app changed, and so forth. So as far as resources, I do have a lot of resources at the end of the slide for setting up SPU as active, stuff about QueryStore. I have a whole presentation on QueryStore that I've done for this group and the WIT group recently. Installing SQL on Linux, all about how to get to Telegraph, Influx, and Grafana. A link to my blog to set up Telegraph, stuff about wait stats. My coworker did some stuff on the Telegraph and Resource Governor, so I've got links to that. And other than that, questions?
Thanks, Tracy. We've got a few. One of the questions is in SQL Server 2017 and the wait stats categories, where do you find that information? And that was back around 2:30. Andy, if you could post what that information is, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, that's in Books Online. Let me see if I can find it. They do have it in Books Online, what categories go into where. If you look for this DMV in Books Online, the QueryStore wait stats, and you scroll down, it tells you which ones go into which categories.
Great. Another question, that looks like a great tool. How would it help to drill down and identify timeout responses? For example, is the connection timeout caused from a database or network related possible issue? And what metrics should be considered to monitor that?
I don't know that's going to give you a timeout because that's just telling you what's running on the SQL Server. It's not going to tell you what's running outside of SQL Server. So it's not keeping up with the individual executions of the queries themselves. So it's not going to keep up with whether it timed out trying to get to the server, because if it didn't get to the server, then it's not going to know about it. And if it ran on the server, it's not keeping up with the execution of the query itself, because it's just keeping up with the metrics behind things running on the server.
Do you import QueryStore info into Telegraph Grafana to see all SQL Server info in one place?
Not currently, but I do know there is some work being done to do that.
Is there a purge process, or does data roll off after a certain time?
You set up a retention policy. I've got mine set at a year, and it rolls off after a year. And you can also set up downsampling so that, like, if you're collecting it every 30 seconds, you can, like, after a month, have it sample it down to every 5 minutes, so it only has like 5 minute increments instead of 30-second increments, so that you can save space.
Um, a couple of people have thanked you for the presentation, and then I have a comment for the migraines. I read a study a while back that the smell of green apples, Granny Smith, relieves migraines. I decided that since I was going to smell like the apple, I would go ahead and eat one a day. I used to get migraines, but I don't any longer. I have let 3 other people know, and it worked for them as well. Hope this helps.
All right, I might have to try that.
You will. And can you send me the PowerPoint, please, so I can post it
Yeah,
with the recording? Thanks.
no problem.
Okay, great, Tracy. I'm so glad we finally made this happen. I hope I'm going to see you at Summit and have a chance to associate a face with a name. Um,
I will
but
be there.
we'll
You just
see.
make sure it happens. You just have to find me. I will be there.
We'll find. You'll be at the wit luncheon, so I'll find you.
Yes, I will be there. Yes. And I have a book panel that I'll be on, so you can definitely find me there.
Okay. Because nobody can ever find me because I'm about 4'11" and therefore invisible. Unless I'm wearing my friends tell me be sure to wear my orange jacket so they can find me.
Yeah, I'll be flying in on Tuesday and I'll be flying out Saturday, so and
Yeah,
I'm looking for quiet stuff to do at night because I don't
I
do the karaoke stuff because of the migraines.
oh, I don't do that stuff either. I'm flying in on Monday, and flying back on Saturday because I find that my day is wasted whether I take a red eye or whether I spend it on a plane. So thank you very much, Tracy. I am so glad we finally made this happen. And I really appreciate all the information you gave. It was fascinating. I'm a performance specialist in many ways. And so some of the things like benchmarks were stuff that I say all the time, but these new tools were something that I hadn't heard about. So I'm going to end the meeting. If you'll send me the PowerPoint, I'll have the recording posted along with the PowerPoint by the end of the week.
Okie dokie. No
Oh, wait a
problem.
sec. We got another question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, just another thank you. Okay, thanks, Tracy. I'm going to end the meeting, and I'll see you in Seattle in the fall.
All right. See you in a few months.